Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we will be comparing a lightly modified 997.1 GT3 against a very heavily modified 997.2 GT3. And the reason this is interesting to me is because I've driven various different 997.1 and .2 GT3 and GT3 RS models, including the RS 4.0, and I've loved every single one of them without fail. But the question is, if you get an early .1 car and just throw some basic mods on it like suspension, in today's market you're looking at roughly $130,000 to $150,000 here in the US. Whereas if you were to go all out on a .2 GT3 without going to the RS, that car's stock is around $160,000 to $190,000. But then what if you throw another $100,000 to $120,000 in mods, including a bespoke engine build and AAA adjustable motorsport dampers, among other things? Then you're looking at $250,000 to $300,000, or double the total cost of a .1 GT3 with basic mods. Can you actually feel a difference, and is it worth the extra money? That's the question. So we're currently sitting in a 2007 997.1 GT3, and the owner, Rich, has kept this thing mostly stock, just very mild mods. We have Ohlins road and track coilovers and an RS 4.0 clutch and lightweight flywheel. Other than that, we just have this aftermarket Momo steering wheel. Just under 2,400 .1 GT3s were produced, and of course, this first version has a 3.6 liter naturally aspirated Metzger flat six engine, making 455 horsepower and 299 pound-feet of torque. The car weighs a little under 3,100 pounds, and this particular car is optioned with PCCB, or Porsche Carbon Ceramic brakes. Rear engine, rear-wheel drive, limited slip diff, 6-speed manual, hydraulic power steering, and even though the front-to-rear balance of a 997 is not the most natural thing in the world, personally I prefer mid-engine or the newer 991.2 or 992 generations in terms of the handling balance, but there's no question this is way more raw. So let's take this for a drive and then hop into that modified .2. Even just backing out of this parking space, the steering is so heavy, hydraulically assisted, but there's a lot of weight to it, much heavier than a 991 or 992 steering rack. The clutch is also extremely heavy. One of the heaviest OEM clutches I think I've ever tried, actually. We have a tunnel and a Metzger flat six. Let's see how it sounds. Glorious. Glorious is the answer to that question. Let's put it into sport mode for enhanced throttle response, really firm brake pedal. Immediately the steering talkative, further enhanced by this steering wheel because it's lighter. Oh yeah, that lightweight RS 4.0 flywheel, just a joy, especially in sport mode. This engine is so responsive, and listen to that sound, 8,400 RPM redline. Easy to heel toe in terms of the throttle response, but the pedals have so much heft to them, especially the clutch, but also the brakes. This is a car that makes you work for the performance. Wow, this car's so raw, but not harsh. That's what I love about the 997 GT3. Regardless of which generation you get, it's both visceral but also approachable. And on a higher speed road like this with fewer second gear corners, mostly third and fourth gear sweepers, the rear engine weight distribution doesn't really hamper this car too much. As long as you do a little bit of trail braking to get the nose tucked in, the front end responds to your inputs. Oh yes. The driver inputs of the 997 are just top notch. Such good steering, such good throttle response, excellent brakes with these PCCBs. Really good brake pedal feel, easy to modulate. So right there, I got on the gas a little bit too early in that second gear corner, and the front started to wash out ever so slightly. That's part of the charm, but also part of the challenge of a 997 GT3. You have to be very cognizant of your weight transfer. This car doesn't have rear axle steering like the newer generations. It doesn't hide the fact that it's a 911. You have to have a pretty strong grip and pretty strong legs to drive a GT3 hard. All the inputs just require a lot of effort and intentionality. See, if I'm more progressive with my throttle application on corner exit, then I can keep the weight balance of the car in check. It's when you treat the gas pedal as an on-off switch, that's when you get into trouble. That's when the car starts to feel understeery. And that's something I'm learning more and more with each 997 that I drive. It's not immediately natural if you're used to driving front engine rear-wheel drive or even mid-engine rear-wheel drive. This has a learning curve. This power level is just so perfect. It's the sweet spot for a 997 in my opinion. For a sub 3,100 pound car, I'm not wishing I had another 150 horsepower, but that 997.2 we're about to drive has basically that additional amount of power. Will it feel overpowered? That's the question. And even with just basic Ohlins Road and Track single-way adjustable coilovers on this car, it strikes such a good balance. Really compliant on the road and in the canyons. Better body control than stock .1 GT3 suspension, but also it soaks up the bumps significantly better. The rear end no longer feels unsettled, which is something I did not like about the stock .1 suspension. Mid-corner balance is so good. There's so much traction coming out of corners. You just got to manage that front end. This engine, 8,400 RPM, Metzger flat 6. Even though this is the smallest Metzger, 3.6 liters, can't really complain. The power output is more than enough. The sound is just amazing. This is just top notch. Driving pleasure. Every time I drive one of these cars, I get so fired up because it just eggs me on. It's a challenge, but it's so rewarding. That's what I love about it. And I love the way the .1 GT3 looks. I think the .2 does look a good deal more modern, especially with the rear bumper. I think the front bumper of the .1 actually looks really good, but I do think the wing and the rear bumper, especially on the .2, modernize it quite a bit in a good way. It still looks classic, but not old, if that makes sense. So with that being said, let's hop into the .2 with a 4.2 liter custom engine build. Over $100,000 in mods. How will it stack up? Will it be double the driving experience of this .1? Let's find out. All right, we're now in the 2010 Porsche 997.2 911 GT3. This is a car I'm actually familiar with. I drove this a few years back, but the owner Walter has done some additional mods to it since then. It's quite an extensive list, so I'll put it in the video description, but let me call out the most important part. This car had a 3.8 liter naturally aspirated flat 6 Metzger engine when it was stock, and that made 435 horsepower, 317 pound-feet of torque. So a reasonable gain of about 20 horsepower and 20 foot-pounds over the 997.1. and also had a similar specific output of about 115 horsepower per liter. However, this car now has a 4.2 liter custom engine build by Autometrics Motorsports, bored and stroked from the 3.8 to the 4.2, Porsche Motorsport RSR crankshaft, Mahle pistons, Carrillo rods, RS 4.0 intake manifold, Dundon carbon fiber airbox, and we have the same RS 4.0 clutch and flywheel as that .1. And BBI did custom dyno tuning and measured this at 450 wheel horsepower. It turns out the last time I drove it, because of the exhaust setup, it was only at 400 wheel horsepower, so it's even quicker now. And this also comes with very high-end JRZ 12.32 triple adjustable coilovers, but Walter has now upped the spring rate. So now we have 10.7K up front, 16.1K in the rear, which are rates almost identical to the 997.2 GT3 RS that I just drove last weekend, which felt very stiff on a canyon road. We've also got some beautiful BBS RE-MTSP forged mono-bloc wheels, AP Racing 2-piece rotors, Euro 996 GT3 buckets, etc., etc. I'm not going to bore you with all the details. Let's just drive this thing and see if it's double the driving experience of a lightly modded .1 GT3. Of course, the interior is a little bit more modern, mostly because of this center console here, the buttons, and just the overall look and feel with this display. Other than that, it's mainly the same interior. This .2 steering wheel is not my favorite. I prefer the .1 steering wheel, not the aftermarket one in that, but just the OEM .1 steering wheel. The .2 just has these really large 3 and 9 grips that just don't feel quite right to me. I wish they were thinner. But minor quibbles aside, let's drive this. We'll put it into sport mode to match what we had in the .1. And of course, we'll crack the window for the obligatory tunnel run. Let's see how it sounds. Okay, that is a good deal more aggressive. Alright, so little unfortunate turn of events here. The car now has a check engine light. The owner, Walter, actually warned me about this before I even hopped into the car. He said he was driving it here on the freeway, not even gunning it, and the check engine light came on. But he told me to go ahead and take it out anyways, and said, if the check engine light comes on, try just turning the car off for a couple minutes and starting it back up. But unfortunately, I did that twice now, and it's still got a check engine light, and it's definitely pulling power. So I am going to limp it back. Very unfortunate, but I'm still going to do this video because I did get to drive it fairly hard on the way up to the filming location, and there are some things that I noticed about this car right away. So I'm going to talk through it. It's not going to be the most exciting footage, but hope you guys can understand, and I hope this car is okay. Things happen with custom engine builds. At least I can still limp it back with about, it feels like 50% power. What did I notice about this car compared to the .1 GT3? Well, first of all, was actually not the engine. Number one is the suspension. JRZ triple adjustable motorsport dampers with 997.2 GT3 RS spring rates, much higher than what you get on the Ohlins. And the difference that was immediately apparent is the way this car responds to bumps, especially mid-corner. You can feel it the most. When you're at high speed, mid-corner, say third gear, and you hit a bump, the car just responds like this. Instant compression rebound, settled. In the Ohlins, if I can try to use my hand to represent what it felt like, it was more like that. A little bit slower, a little bit lazier. It's still settled, but it was slower to respond and slower to settle. Everything had this kind of dulled quality to it. Still a huge improvement over the .1 GT3 stock suspension, but this is just far superior. It makes the car feel so razor edged, not in a scary way, but more in line with just how insane this engine is. And that's the second part. The engine response is heightened over the .1, not just the power, how quickly this engine revs up and down. And at the top end, as you saw back there when I revved it out in the tunnel, there's so much pull at the top end. 450 wheel horsepower is probably about close to 100 wheel horsepower more than the stock .1 GT3. That being said though, it doesn't necessarily sound that different. The character's not all that different. This engine build though, if you were to do it brand new right now, Walter said you're looking at $100,000 to $120,000. That's an enormous amount of money to gain about 100 wheel horsepower at most, but still have virtually the same engine character. And I gotta say, unless you're keeping your GT3 for life, and it's truly just your favorite car and you will spare no expense on the build, I don't think it's really worth it. That's just me being as objective as possible. And the reason I say that is if you do the math, you spend $160,000 to $190,000 on a stock .2 GT3, then you spend another, call it $100K on the engine build. You keep it at that. You don't do any other suspension or brake mods or anything. You're looking at $260,000 to $290,000. At that point, you're talking 997.2 GT3 RS prices, or pretty close. And if you did all the supporting mods, the suspension, the brakes, add some aero and whatnot, you're looking at very good condition 997.2 GT3 RS money. Personally, I'd rather just have the GT3 RS, because at that point, it needs very little mods. The engine is fine as is. It already has the light flywheel and clutch. Maybe you can just upgrade the suspension, wheels and tires and call it a day. If you were to buy a pre-built car like this, you won't be paying anywhere near 300K, because as we all know in the world of modifications, you never really quite make back the money that you spend on mods, even if they're very high quality, desirable mods, unless it's just wheels. So conclusion here is that this car definitely is noticeably better, more powerful, more fun, more engaging, better handling than the .1 GT3 with Ohlins. But does that actually make it worth the money? In my opinion, it's a stretch. It really is a stretch. I would have a hard time justifying spending this. And that's no knock on this car. It's just the simple fact that the .1 GT3 is already such an amazing platform. You're getting one of the best cars in the world in terms of driving feel. So a big shout out to the owners Rich and Walter. Let me know what you think about this comparison. Again, very unfortunate that the engine is having some issues. That's also the risk of going with a fully custom engine build, right? So let me know what you think about the comparison down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, so in a promising turn of events, Walter reset the tune, or the ECU, and said the issue is gone. We're gonna short shift it by a few hundred RPM, but hopefully I can get some decent driving footage for you guys to close out this video. I'm not gonna talk too much. I'll let the car do the talking. really got to rev it above 5. Okay, on that little stretch of blissful driving, this car makes a lot more sense now. Do I think it's double the experience of that 997.1? No, but that also applies to how I feel about the 997.1 and .2 GT3 RS compared to a .1 GT3. The experience doesn't scale linearly with price. You have to pay to get that extra 5 to 10%. And that's what this car is all about as well. The engine is phenomenal. So much top-end power. Not a whole lot of mid-range torque. It really comes on cam around 5,000 or so. But wow, when it comes on, it's on. And the front-end response of this and the way it absorbs bumps is so much more immediate. If it were me though, I think I'd still go GT3 RS for the money. But if I could buy a pre-built car like this, for let's say 200, 220, that would be tempting. But overall, my conclusion doesn't change. Just wanted to give you guys a real feel for how this car actually drives when there's no check engine light. All right, guys, a shout out to Walter and Rich again. See you very soon.